The first time Amelie saw billionaire Uthan Cross cry, she pretended she hadn't. It was nearly 2 in the morning, and the mansion was silent except for the sound of breaking glass from his private library. Amelie had only worked there for 6 days. She had already learned that Uthan Cross was not a man anyone questioned. He owned companies across the world, lived behind towering gates, and could silence an entire room with one glance. His employees called him heartless, newspapers called him untouchable. But that night, Amelie discovered the truth. The billionaire wasn't heartless. His heart had already been broken. On the floor beside him lay an old photograph, a wedding ring, and a letter he seemed unable to finish reading. Amelie quietly cleaned the shattered glass and walked away without asking a single question. The next morning, Uthan summoned her to his office. "You saw nothing last night," he said coldly. Amelie nodded. But something had changed between them. Days passed, and Uthan began noticing the maid who never treated him like a billionaire. She challenged his bitterness with kindness, filled the empty mansion with laughter, and somehow remembered the smallest things everyone else ignored. For the first time in years, Uthan started coming downstairs for breakfast. The curtains opened. Music returned to the halls. And the man who had promised never to care about anyone again slowly began to change. But Amelie had not entered the Cross mansion by accident. Hidden inside her suitcase was a photograph connected to Uthan's painful past, and if he ever discovered it, everything between them could be destroyed. Why did Amelie really take the job at his mansion? Who was the woman in Uthan's mysterious photograph? And what will happen when the billionaire discovers that the maid healing his broken heart may know the truth about the night that shattered it? Before we continue, if you believe kindness can reach places money never can, and that a person should be judged by the goodness of their heart rather than the size of their bank account, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Stories like this remind us that the person everyone overlooks may be the one carrying the truth, the courage, and the compassion powerful people desperately need. Stay with us, because what Amelie was hiding would soon shake the Cross family to its foundation, and the people Uthan trusted most were already planning the betrayal that could cost him everything. The morning after Uthan confronted Amelie about the broken glass, breakfast was served at precisely 7. At 7:05, the dining room remained empty. At 7:10, Amelie stood beside the enormous mahogany table, looking at enough food to feed 12 people, and wondering why one lonely man needed a dining room with 20 chairs. The mansion had everything except warmth. Marble floors reflected chandeliers worth more than the house Amelie had grown up in. Paintings from famous artists watched silently from gilded frames. Every room was spotless. Yet the place felt abandoned. At 7:15, Amelie did something the senior housekeeper had warned her never to do. She walked upstairs and knocked on Uthan Cross's bedroom door. No answer. She knocked again. "Mr. Cross." Silence. She opened the door slightly. Uthan stood at the window in a white shirt and dark trousers, his back toward her. "I don't remember inviting you in. Breakfast is getting cold." "I'm not hungry." Amelie hesitated. She had been warned about his temper, but she remembered her mother saying something whenever Amelie became afraid of difficult people. Sometimes anger is simply pain that learned how to shout. "You weren't hungry yesterday either." Uthan slowly turned. "Are you keeping records?" "No." "Then do your job." "I am." His eyes narrowed. Amelie swallowed. "My job includes making sure meals are served. I can't force you to eat them, but I can at least make you feel guilty about wasting perfectly good pancakes." For several seconds, Uthan stared at her. Amelie wondered whether she had just destroyed her chances of receiving a second week's paycheck. Then something almost impossible happened. The corner of Uthan's mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "I don't eat pancakes." Amelie nodded seriously. "I'll alert the newspapers." She turned and walked out before courage deserted her. 10 minutes later, Uthan entered the dining room. The house staff looked as though the chandelier had fallen from the ceiling. Nobody said anything. Amelie placed coffee beside him. Uthan looked at the pancakes, then at Amelie, then back at the pancakes. He ate too. From the doorway, Avlan Cross watched everything. Uthan's mother had arrived at the mansion that morning without warning. Avlan was an elegant woman in her early 60s whose posture seemed designed to make everyone else straighten theirs. Her silver-streaked hair was perfectly arranged, her clothing immaculate. She noticed the impossible immediately. Her son was eating breakfast, and the new maid was responsible. That should have pleased her. Instead, something about Amelie made Avlan uneasy. Perhaps it was because Uthan looked at the young woman differently. Not with affection. Not yet. But with awareness. For years, Uthan had stopped noticing people. Now he noticed Amelie. And Avlan Cross believed she already knew the woman her son should notice. Victoria Bunnett. Beautiful. Educated. From one of the oldest wealthy families in Connecticut. And most importantly, Uthan's fiancée. Victoria arrived that afternoon. The sound of her heels crossed the marble entrance hall before her perfume did. She handed her coat to Amelie without looking at her. "Where is Uthan?" "In his office." Victoria paused. "You're new." "Yes, ma'am." Victoria finally looked at her. Her smile was pleasant, but her eyes weren't. "Try not to become comfortable. Staff changes frequently here." Then she walked away. Amelie watched her disappear down the corridor. Something cold moved through her. She told herself it was nothing. But Amelie had learned long ago to pay attention when someone smiled without kindness. Victoria entered Uthan's office without knocking. "There you are." Uthan looked up from his laptop. Victoria leaned down and kissed his cheek. "You disappeared from the city again." "I live here." "You hide here." Uthan didn't answer. Victoria sighed. Their engagement had been announced 6 months earlier. The photographs had appeared everywhere. Billionaire businessman finally finds love again. Society, heiress heals grieving widower. A perfect match. At least that was what the magazines called it. The truth was less beautiful. Uthan had not proposed because he had fallen deeply in love. He had proposed because he was tired. Tired of loneliness. Tired of his mother telling him Amelie would not want him to spend the rest of his life alone. Tired of waking every morning inside a house filled with memories. Victoria had been patient. She had never demanded that he forget Amelie. She had simply placed herself beside his grief until Uthan eventually began confusing familiarity with love. At least that was what Amelie would later understand. That afternoon, Victoria placed several papers in front of Uthan. "Mother wants the family trust restructuring finished before the wedding." Uthan frowned. "Again. It protects everyone. I already have attorneys." Grant looked over the preliminary documents. At the mention of Grant Holloway, Uthan relaxed slightly. Grant had been his best friend since college. They had started their first business together in a rented apartment with broken air conditioning and a folding table serving as a desk. Grant had stood beside Uthan at his first wedding. He had stood beside him at Amelie's funeral. If there was one man Ethan believed would never betray him, it was Grant. Fine, Ethan said, leave them. Victoria smiled. That's why I love you. But as she turned toward the door, Ethan returned to his computer before seeing her expression change. Emily did. She had been entering with coffee. For one brief second, Victoria stared at the papers with satisfaction rather than affection. Then her smile returned. Emily said nothing. She had learned that rich houses could contain poor intentions. Her own childhood had taught her that. Emily had grown up 30 miles away in a modest home with yellow curtains, creaking floors, and a backyard her mother filled with flowers. Her mother, Margaret Carter, had never been wealthy, but she possessed something no amount of money could purchase. People trusted her. Years earlier, Margaret had worked as a private companion and assistant for Emily Cross, Ethan's wife. Emily had been 16 when her mother first mentioned the Cross family. She's wonderful, Margaret had said one evening while chopping vegetables. Not what you'd expect. What do I expect? A spoiled billionaire's wife. Emily had laughed. Isn't she? No, Amelia remembers birthdays. She asks about you. Emily had never met Amelia, but she began knowing her through her mother's stories. Amelia loved old jazz records. She hated extravagant parties. She once donated half the flowers from a charity gala to a nursing home because she said beauty shouldn't be thrown away. And according to Margaret, she loved Ethan with a devotion that frightened even herself. Then came the night everything changed. Emily still remembered waking at 1:17 a.m. to the ringing telephone. Her mother answered. Emily watched the color leave her face. Amelia Cross had died after a car accident. Ethan survived. Amelia didn't. Margaret returned from the hospital the following morning, looking 10 years older. For weeks, she barely spoke. Then, mysteriously, she left her position with the Cross family and refused to explain why. 2 years later, Margaret became ill. Before she died, she gave Emily a small wooden box. Not yet, she whispered. Emily held her mother's hand. Not yet what? You'll know. Inside the box was a photograph. Margaret stood beside Amelia Cross in a garden. Amelia was laughing. Behind the photograph were 3 handwritten words. He deserves truth. There was also an unopened envelope addressed to Ethan Cross. Emily had carried it for nearly 3 years. She had tried mailing it twice. Each time, fear stopped her. Why had her mother kept a letter belonging to Ethan? What truth was inside? And why had Margaret insisted that Emily would know when the time was right? Then Emily saw a housekeeping advertisement for the Cross estate. Something inside her told her to apply. Now she was standing inside the very home her mother had once described. Watching Ethan Cross slowly return to life. And hiding a letter from his dead wife. The guilt grew heavier every day. Meanwhile, Ethan began changing. It happened in tiny ways. He stopped closing every curtain. He started walking through the garden. One evening, he entered the music room after hearing someone playing the piano badly. Emily sat at the bench. She jumped when she saw him. I apologize. You play. Clearly not. Ethan looked at the keys. My mother paid for lessons when I was 10, Emily said. I quit after 3 weeks because my teacher told me I had no discipline. She was probably right. Emily looked offended. You've never heard my full performance. I heard enough. She stood. You try. Ethan's expression changed instantly. No. Something in that single word told Emily she had touched a wound. She stepped away from the piano. Okay. Ethan stared at the keys. Amelia had played. Every Sunday morning. He remembered standing in the doorway years earlier, watching sunlight fall across her hands. "You're staring again," Amelia had once said without turning. "You're terrible at pretending you don't know I'm here." She had smiled over her shoulder. "Then come sit with me." The memory vanished. Ethan's jaw tightened. Emily saw grief cross his face. She did not ask. She simply closed the piano lid. "Good night, Mr. Cross." The next morning, she found him sitting at the piano alone. He played one quiet melody, then another. Within weeks, the mansion staff began whispering that Emily had performed a miracle. Ethan spoke more. He worked fewer midnight hours. He even attended dinner with his mother without spending half the meal staring at his phone. Evelyn should have been delighted. Instead, Victoria encouraged her concern. "She doesn't understand boundaries," Victoria said one afternoon as they drank tea. Evelyn glanced toward the garden, where Ethan and Emily were talking beside a fountain. Emily had been explaining why the gardener was afraid to ask Ethan for time off to attend his daughter's graduation. To everyone's surprise, Ethan had agreed immediately. "She's staff," Evelyn said. "Exactly." Victoria lowered her voice. "And Ethan is vulnerable." Evelyn stiffened. "My son is not vulnerable." Victoria touched her hand. "Of course not, but grief changes people." The phrase worked. Victoria had learned Evelyn's weaknesses carefully. Pride, fear, and guilt. Evelyn had never forgiven herself for persuading Amelia to drive to a charity dinner on the night of the accident. Amelia had wanted to stay home. Evelyn had insisted. The storm worsened. The car crashed. Though nobody blamed Evelyn, she blamed herself. Victoria knew this. And whenever Evelyn questioned the engagement, Victoria gently reminded her that Ethan deserved stability. That she could give it to him. That another emotional disaster might destroy him. Victoria wasn't protecting Ethan. She was protecting access to him. Later that night, Victoria stood inside a guest bedroom with her phone pressed against her ear. "She is becoming a problem," she whispered. Grant Holloway laughed softly from the other end. "A maid." Ethan listens to her. So he wasn't supposed to start thinking again. Silence followed. Then Grant said, "The wedding is 8 weeks away. Keep Evelyn nervous, keep Ethan distracted, and get the signatures. And afterward, we control the trust transfers." Victoria smiled. "And the divorce. Slowly. And us." Grant paused. "Exactly as we planned." Neither noticed Emily standing in the hallway. She had not heard everything. Only fragments. Signatures. Transfers. Divorce. Planned. Her heart began pounding. She moved away before Victoria opened the door. That night Emily didn't sleep. She told herself she had misunderstood. Perhaps Victoria had been discussing someone else's divorce. Perhaps the transfers were ordinary business. But then she remembered the look Victoria had given the trust documents. The next morning, Emily approached Ethan. He was reading financial reports beside the library window. "Can I ask you something?" "That depends." "Do you trust Mr. Holloway?" Ethan looked up. "Grant." "Yes. With my life." Emily's stomach tightened. "Why?" "No reason." Ethan closed the report. "Emily." She hesitated. I overheard something last night. His expression hardened. You were listening to private conversations. No, I was walking past a room. What did you hear? She told him. Not everything. Only the words. Ethan stared at her for a moment before giving a tired laugh. You heard 4 words through a door and built a conspiracy. I said I might be wrong. You are. Emily looked down. Okay. Grant has been my friend for 20 years. I understand. And Victoria is going to be my wife. I understand. Do you? Emily met his eyes. Yes, trust matters. Something about her tone made Ethan uncomfortable. Because trust mattered. And years earlier, he'd trusted a driver who insisted the storm wasn't dangerous. He trusted a road barrier that failed. He trusted life not to take Amelia from him. Trust had become a word Ethan wanted desperately to believe in. A week later, everything changed. Emily entered Ethan's study carrying files the estate manager had left downstairs. Nobody was there. As she placed them on the desk, one document slipped to the floor. Emily bent down. The heading caught her attention. Cross Family Holdings Beneficiary Amendment. She should have looked away. Instead, one name stopped her. Grant Holloway. Emily frowned. Why would Ethan's best friend appear on a family beneficiary document? She heard footsteps. Victoria entered. Her face changed when she saw the paper. What are you doing? It fell. Victoria snatched it from her. You're paid to clean floors, not read documents. I wasn't. You've been watching me. Emily said nothing. Victoria stepped closer. Listen carefully. Ethan may enjoy your little conversations, but don't confuse his loneliness with importance. I haven't. You think you're helping him. I hope I am. Victoria laughed. You're temporary. Then her gaze dropped toward Emily's pocket. The edge of an old photograph was visible. Emily's breath caught. Victoria pulled it free before Emily could stop her. Her smile disappeared. Amelia Cross stared back from the photograph. Beside her stood Margaret Carter. Where did you get this? Give it back. Victoria turned the photograph over. He deserves truth. Her face went pale. Emily grabbed it. What do you know? Victoria demanded. About what? Your mother. Emily froze. She had never mentioned Margaret. Victoria realized her mistake. Too late. How do you know that's my mother? Silence. Victoria recovered quickly. Evelyn mentioned her. That isn't true. Victoria's eyes hardened. Get out. Emily walked directly to her room. Her hands shook. Victoria knew Margaret. And Margaret had left Ethan a letter. The pieces were beginning to move. Emily opened her suitcase and removed the envelope. For the first time, she considered opening it. She couldn't. It belonged to Ethan. She carried it downstairs. But before she reached his office, Evelyn stepped into the corridor. Victoria stood beside her. Both women looked furious. Emily, Evelyn said, come with us. They entered the sitting room. Ethan wasn't there. Victoria placed the photograph on the table. She has been lying since the day she arrived. Emily's heart dropped. Evelyn picked it up. Her expression changed when she saw Amelia. Margaret Carter. You knew my mother. Evelyn looked at her sharply. Why are you here? I found something after she died. What? Emily reached for the letter. Victoria interrupted. She came here under false pretenses. She's been questioning Ethan about the family, listening at doors, and reading private financial documents. That's not what happened. Victoria turned toward Evelyn. She is exploiting his grief. Emily stared at her. You're lying. How dare you? I heard you talking about transfers and divorce. Evelyn's expression stiffened. Victoria laughed. You see, she invents stories. Emily turned to Evelyn. Ask Ethan to examine the trust documents. Enough. Evelyn's voice cut through the room. My son has suffered enough without someone entering this house, carrying photographs of his dead wife. Emily felt tears burn behind her eyes. I came because my mother left Ethan something. Victoria moved forward. Whatever story you're selling, we don't want it. It's not for you. Evelyn stood. You will live today. Emily stared at her. Mrs. Cross, you're dismissed. Just then Ethan entered. What is happening? Emily turned. For 1 second, relief crossed her face. Victoria saw it and hated her for it. Evelyn spoke first. Emily deceived us. Ethan looked at the photograph. He picked it up. Amelia. His face drained of color. He looked at Emily. Where did you get this? My mother. Your mother knew Amelia. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Emily struggled to speak. Because I didn't know how. Ethan's expression changed. Every moment of trust between them seemed to collapse. You came here because of her. Yes. The answer wounded him more than Emily expected. He stepped backward. So none of this was an accident. Ethan, you applied here because of Amelia. Yes, but... Leave. Emily stared at him. Victoria's mouth almost smiled. Please let me explain. I said leave. Emily's voice trembled. My mother left you a letter. At that, Ethan looked at her. Emily removed the envelope and placed it on the table. I never opened it. Then she turned and walked away. Nobody stopped her. Not even Ethan. 20 minutes later, Emily crossed the mansion's front steps carrying one suitcase. Rain had begun falling. Behind an upstairs window, Ethan watched her walk toward the waiting taxi. Something inside him wanted to call her back. Pride stopped him. Fear helped. Everyone left eventually. Amelia had. Now Emily. Maybe emptiness was safer. Victoria slipped her arm around him. You did the right thing. Ethan looked at the road long after the taxi disappeared. That evening, the mansion became silent again. Breakfast went untouched. The curtains closed. The piano stopped. But one thing was different. Emily's absence felt louder than the loneliness that had existed before her arrival. For 3 days, Ethan refused to open the letter. On the fourth night, he carried it into the library, the same room where Emily had first seen him cry. He broke the seal. Inside was Amelia's handwriting. Ethan stopped breathing for a moment. My Ethan, if Margaret is giving you this, something has happened that prevented me from telling you myself. His hands began trembling. He continued. Amelia wrote that she had become worried about several financial irregularities involving people close to Ethan. She had spoken to Margaret because Margaret was one of the few people outside the family she trusted completely. She had found unexplained transactions connected to Grant Holloway. Nothing was proven. Amelia feared accusing Ethan's closest friend without evidence. Then came the line that shattered Ethan. If anything ever happens to me, do not let grief make you trust people simply because you are afraid to be alone. Ethan lowered the letter. Memories rushed through him. Grant convincing him to expand overseas after Amelia's death. Grant introducing Victoria at a charity dinner 2 years later. Victoria becoming close to Evelyn. Victoria encouraging the marriage. Trust documents. Beneficiary amendments. Emily's warning. Signatures. Transfers. Divorce. Ethan stood so quickly, the chair fell backward. For the first time in years, grief wasn't controlling him. Suspicion was. He called his private attorney. Daniel, I want a complete review of every trust amendment, account authorization, and company transaction connected to Grant Holloway and Victoria Bennett. Daniel hesitated. Ethan, it's midnight. Then start at midnight. The investigation took 3 days. What they found was worse than Ethan imagined. Grant had spent years building companies that secretly invoiced cross-subsidiaries for services never provided. The amounts had been small initially, then larger. Victoria had helped. She had persuaded Evelyn to approve several family foundation expenses by claiming they supported charitable partnerships. The money instead flowed through layers of corporate accounts connected to Grant. But that wasn't the final plan. The marriage was. Victoria's attorneys had prepared amendments that would expand her authority over several marital assets after the wedding. Grant had quietly positioned himself as advisor to structures controlling other holdings. Together, they hoped to weaken Ethan's control, move enormous sums through fraudulent transactions, manufacture marital conflict, and eventually have Victoria divorce Ethan after securing a huge settlement. Messages recovered during the investigation made the final betrayal unmistakable. Victoria and Grant were not simply partners in fraud. They were planning a future together. One message read, "Once the divorce is settled, we'll never have to pretend again." Another, "Evelyn trusts me completely, Ethan trusts you completely, that's why this works." Ethan stared at the screen. 20 years. Grant had been beside him for 20 years. He remembered their college dorm room. Cheap pizza. Impossible dreams. The night Ethan's first company nearly collapsed, and Grant slept on his office floor beside him. He remembered Grant standing at Amelia's funeral, hand on Ethan's shoulder. Brother, Grant had called him. Brother. Ethan felt physically sick. His attorney continued speaking. "There is one more thing." "What?" Margaret Carter apparently raised concerns years ago. Ethan froze. "Emily's mother." "Yes." "She contacted your former chief financial officer about transactions she discovered while assisting Amelia." "What happened?" "The complaint disappeared." "Why?" Daniel looked uncomfortable. Grant was on the internal review committee. Ethan closed his eyes. Now everything made sense. Margaret hadn't kept Amelia's letter because she wanted to. She had been afraid. She had tried to warn someone. Grant had been positioned to stop her. And Emily had entered Ethan's home carrying the truth. He had thrown her into the rain. Ethan immediately drove to his mother's house. Evelyn was having tea with Victoria. Grant was there too. Perfect. Ethan entered without greeting anyone. Victoria smiled. "Darling, don't." The single word silenced the room. Grant stood. "Something wrong." Ethan dropped a folder onto the table. "Tell me." Grant looked at it. His face barely changed. Victoria's did. Evelyn frowned. What is this? Ethan looked at his mother. Proof. Proof of what? That the woman you trusted intends to rob this family. Victoria stood. This is ridiculous. And afterward, Ethan continued, she planned to divorce me. Evelyn stared at Victoria. Ethan! And marry Grant. Silence. Evelyn slowly turned toward the man she had welcomed into her family for decades. Grant said nothing. That was his first mistake. Victoria recovered faster. He's grieving. Emily poisoned him against us. Ethan laughed once. There was no humor in it. Emily. He stepped closer. Emily warned me. Victoria's face tightened. You're choosing a maid over your family. No. Ethan looked at Grant. I'm choosing evidence over liars. Grant finally spoke. You don't understand the transactions. My attorneys do. Grant's face changed. Ethan continued. So will federal investigators. Victoria stepped backward. Evelyn's teacup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. For a moment, Ethan was transporting back to the library. Broken glass. A photograph. Emily quietly cleaning around a grieving man. Only now he understood something. She had seen him broken and protected his dignity. Victoria had seen him broken and calculated his value. Evelyn looked devastated. You told me those transfers were for the foundation. Victoria said nothing. You told me, Evelyn repeated, you loved my son. I do. No, Ethan said. You loved what my name could buy. Grant moved toward the door. Two investigators entering from the hallway stopped him. Ethan's attorney had arranged everything. As Grant was escorted away, he turned. Ethan! For 20 years, Ethan would have answered. That day, he didn't. Victoria followed minutes later, still protesting. Evelyn remained standing amid the shattered porcelain. Her hands shook. I sent Emily away. Ethan looked at her. So did I. I believed Victoria. So did I. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She saved you. Ethan looked toward the rain outside. Yes, and we punished her for it. Ethan left without answering. Finding Emily was easier than earning her forgiveness. She had returned to her old neighborhood and taken a temporary job at a small hotel. Ethan found her behind the front desk on a Tuesday afternoon. Emily looked up. Her expression froze. Mr. Cross. The formality hurt more than he expected. Emily. Her manager recognized him immediately and nearly dropped a stack of papers. Emily stepped around the desk. What are you doing here? I came to apologize. You could have called. You wouldn't answer. I had reasons. I know. She folded her arms. Ethan had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without hesitation. Standing before Emily Carter made him nervous. You were right. About what? Victoria, Grant, everything. Emily's face changed. Ethan told her enough to understand. When he finished, she looked stunned. Your mother. Victoria manipulated her too. That doesn't excuse what happened. No. The answer surprised Emily. Ethan didn't defend himself. He didn't defend Evelyn. He simply stood there. My mother tried to warn you, Emily said quietly. She did. And you would never have known if I hadn't brought that letter. No. You fired me before reading it. Yes. Ethan swallowed. I was afraid. Emily looked at him. The billionaire who commanded thousands of employees. The man newspapers called fearless. What were you afraid of? That everything between us had been fake. Emily's expression softened slightly. It was. I know that now. You didn't then. No. Ethan nodded. And I hurt you because fear was easier than trusting you. Emily looked away. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket. He placed her mother's photograph on the counter. I think this belongs to you. Emily picked it up. Amelia's laughing face stared back at her. My mother cared about her. I know. She cared about you too, although she barely knew you. Ethan smiled sadly. Apparently, she knew enough. Emily's thumb passed over the edge of the photograph. What happens now? Victoria and Grant will answer for what they did. I mean with you. Ethan looked at her. He could have said something grand. He could have offered her money. A house. A position. Anything. But Emily had never wanted his wealth. That was precisely why he trusted her. I don't know, he said. It was perhaps the most honest answer Ethan Cross had given anyone in years. Emily nodded. Then start there. Weeks passed. Ethan didn't ask Emily to return to the mansion. He understood that asking would be selfish. Instead, he began repairing what he could. He restored Margaret Carter's reputation publicly. The Cross Foundation created an ethics program in Margaret's name, designed to protect employees who reported wrongdoing. Evelyn personally visited Emily. She didn't bring flowers. She didn't bring money. She brought an apology. I judged you because of where you stood in my son's house, Evelyn said. I forgot that dignity has nothing to do with position. Emily listened. Evelyn's voice broke. You gave me back my son, and I helped throw you away. Emily didn't immediately forgive her. But she accepted the apology. That was enough for a beginning. Ethan changed too. Not because Emily forced him. Because she had reminded him that being alive required participation. He reopened the music room. He began visiting old friends. He reduced the impossible hours he spent working. He even returned to Amelia's grave for the first time in months, without feeling that leaving afterward was a betrayal. One Sunday, he stood there holding Amelia's letter. You were right, he whispered. Wind moved through the trees. He remembered her laughter. Her piano playing. The way she had once told him that grief was the price people paid for having something worth missing. For years, Ethan believed healing meant forgetting her. Now he understood. Healing meant remembering without allowing the memory to become a prison. Several months later, Emily received an invitation. Not to work. To dinner. She almost refused. Then she noticed the handwritten line beneath Ethan's name. No uniforms, no employment contracts, and no pancakes unless requested. Emily laughed. She went. The mansion looked different. The curtains were open. Employees spoke without fear. Fresh flowers stood in the entrance hall. The piano was uncovered. Ethan waited beside it. You're late. By 4 minutes. I noticed. You should alert the newspapers. This time, Ethan smiled fully. Emily saw something in his face she had never seen during her first week in the mansion. Peace. Not complete. Perhaps never complete. But real. They ate dinner at the enormous table. Only this time, Ethan had removed most of the chairs. There were too many, he explained. Emily nodded. For once, we agree. Afterward, they walked through the garden. Ethan stopped beside the fountain, where Evelyn had once watched them from the window. I've been thinking. Dangerous. I agree. Emily smiled. Ethan became serious. When you first came here, I thought you were an employee who didn't understand boundaries. You weren't entirely wrong. Then I thought you were someone trying to interfere in my life. You weren't entirely wrong about that either. He laughed softly. And then I realized you were doing something no one else around me had done for years. What? Saying me? Emily's smile faded. Ethan continued. Not the company, not the money, not Amelia's widow or me. Emily looked toward the mansion. You made that difficult. I know. You were unbearable. I've been told. Mostly by me. Almost exclusively. They laughed. Then silence returned. Comfortable silence. Ethan did not make promises about forever. Emily did not ask for them. Their relationship grew the same way Ethan had healed. Slowly. Honestly. One ordinary day at a time. There were breakfasts. Long conversations. Arguments. More apologies than either expected. Evelyn learned not to interfere. Ethan learned that saying, I'm fine, did not magically make it true. Emily learned that she did not have to spend her life carrying her mother's unfinished responsibilities. And over time, the mansion that once echoed with absence filled with something it had not known for years. Life. The legal case against Victoria and Grant unfolded publicly. The newspapers that once celebrated Ethan and Victoria's engagement now printed stories about fraud investigations and betrayed trust. Ethan hated the attention, but he refused to hide. When a reporter asked how a sophisticated businessman could have failed to notice what people so close to him were doing, Ethan answered simply, trust without attention can become blindness. He could have blamed grief. He could have blamed Victoria. He could have blamed Grant. Instead, he accepted the lesson. Evelyn did too. She sold several pieces of expensive jewelry and donated the money anonymously to organizations supporting people who faced financial exploitation. She never told Ethan. Emily found out accidentally. She said nothing. Some apologies were spoken. Others were lived. A year after Emily first arrived at the mansion, Ethan stood in the library at nearly 2 in the morning. The room was quiet. No shattered glass. No unopened letters. No darkness swallowing every corner. Emily appeared in the doorway. You're awake. So are you. I heard something. What? Nothing. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Emily smiled. That's why I came. She walked inside. The old photograph of Amelia rested on a shelf. Beside it was the photograph Emily's mother had kept. Nobody had hidden either one. Ethan looked at them. For a long time, I thought loving the memory of someone meant there wasn't room for anything new. Emily leaned against the desk. And now I think the heart doesn't replace people. Emily waited. It grows. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows. Exactly as it had on the day Emily was thrown out. Ethan noticed. So did she. Funny how the same sound could belong to two entirely different memories. Once, rain had followed Emily away from the mansion, carrying a suitcase and a broken heart. Now it surrounded a home that finally felt alive. Ethan looked at Emily. What? She smiled. You're staring. I've been told I'm terrible at pretending I'm not. For a moment, Ethan heard Amelia's voice from another lifetime. You're terrible at pretending you don't know I'm here. The memory didn't hurt the same way. He smiled. Emily noticed. What are you thinking about? Someone who taught me that love should make you more alive, not less. Emily understood. Neither needed to say Amelia's name. Some people left fingerprints on the soul long after they were gone. And perhaps that was the final gift Amelia had left Ethan. Not merely a letter exposing suspicion. Not merely a warning about Grant. Permission. Permission to keep living. Permission to trust carefully without surrendering his ability to trust at all. Permission to understand that losing one chapter did not mean closing the entire book. Emily had delivered that gift without realizing she was becoming part of the answer herself. Ethan walked toward the window. Lights from the garden reflected against the glass. For decades, money had solved almost every practical problem he faced. It built companies, bought houses, hired experts, opened doors. But money hadn't sat beside him during grief. It hadn't challenged him to eat breakfast. It hadn't opened the curtains. It hadn't laughed at his impossible rules. It hadn't risked being dismissed to warn him that something was wrong. A maid had done those things. A woman his family had initially considered socially insignificant. A woman Victoria had called temporary. Yet in the end, Victoria's place in the mansion had been temporary. Grant's loyalty had been temporary. The illusion surrounding Ethan's perfect life had been temporary. Emily's kindness endured. Months later, Ethan took Emily to the small yellow house where she had grown up. The house had been empty since her mother's death. Dust covered the windowsills. The backyard garden was overgrown. Emily stood beneath the kitchen doorway and remembered her mother chopping vegetables while saying that anger was pain that learned how to shout. She smiled through tears. She would have liked you, Emily said. Ethan examined the peeling wallpaper. I'm not sure. She liked difficult people. Then she would have adored me. Emily laughed. They found Margaret's old gardening gloves inside a drawer. An unpaid grocery receipt. A birthday card Emily had written as a child. Ordinary things. Yet Ethan handled them carefully. Emily realized then that he understood something Victoria never had. Wealth wasn't measured by how expensive something looked. Sometimes a handwritten birthday card could be priceless. Ethan helped Emily restore the garden. Not by hiring 20 landscapers as he initially suggested. Emily refused. You're going to get your hands dirty. I own companies. Congratulations, here's a shovel. For 3 weekends, the billionaire worked in soil. Evelyn visited once and nearly laughed herself breathless when she saw him covered in mud. Emily took a photograph. Ethan demanded she delete it. She didn't. The photograph eventually appeared framed in the Cross Mansion's kitchen. Not the formal dining room. Not the gallery. The kitchen. A place where real life happened. 2 years after the night Emily first heard breaking glass from the library, Ethan hosted a small gathering at the mansion. There were no reporters. No society photographers. No investors seeking introductions. Only people Ethan genuinely wanted present. Employees joined dinner. Evelyn sat beside the gardener whose daughter's graduation Ethan had once nearly caused him to miss. Laughter filled the dining room. At one point, Ethan stood in the doorway and simply listened. Emily approached. "Everything okay?" He nodded. "I never thought this house would sound like this again." "Like what?" "Like a home." Emily looked around. Then at him. "It always could have." "I know. You just needed to open the curtains." He smiled. "And apparently eat pancakes." Very important step. Across the room, Evelyn watched them. There was no suspicion in her eyes anymore. Only gratitude. She thought about the day she had ordered Emily to leave. How confidently she had believed wealth, family name, and social status were proof of character. Victoria possessed all three, and she had nearly destroyed them. Emily arrived with one suitcase, modest clothes, and no powerful connections. And she saved what money could not. Evelyn understood the irony. Years earlier, she had feared Emily might take something from Ethan. Instead, Emily returned something. His heart. Not the heart he had before Amelia died. That heart belonged to another version of Ethan. She helped him build a new one. Stronger because it had been broken. Wiser because it had been deceived. Kinder because someone had shown him kindness when he least deserved it. Later that evening, Ethan entered the music room. Emily followed. He sat at the piano. "I thought you didn't play anymore," she said. "I changed my mind." He began the melody Amelia once played on Sunday mornings. Emily listened. When the final note faded, Ethan looked toward the photograph on the nearby table. Then toward Emily. There was sadness in his eyes. But sadness no longer frightened him. It lived beside gratitude, beside hope, beside love. Healing, Ethan finally understood, had never meant becoming the man he was before his heart broke. It meant becoming someone capable of carrying the broken pieces without cutting everyone who tried to come close. Grant had taught him that history did not guarantee loyalty. Victoria taught him that appearances did not guarantee character. Evelyn learned that social status did not guarantee goodness. Margaret Carter taught them that truth sometimes survives because one ordinary person refuses to bury it. And Emily taught Ethan perhaps the greatest lesson of all. A person did not need wealth to enrich someone's life. They needed courage, patience, compassion, and the willingness to stay kind, even when kindness offered no guarantee of reward. Years later, people would still tell the story of the maid who entered a billionaire's mansion and changed everything. Some versions would claim Ethan rescued Emily from poverty. Those who actually knew them laughed at that, because they knew the truth. Emily had never needed Ethan to rescue her. She had walked into his mansion already carrying strength, already carrying purpose, already carrying a truth powerful people had tried to bury. Ethan had been the one trapped inside a beautiful prison, and she had simply shown him where the door was. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, remember its message. Never underestimate a person because of their job, background, clothes, or bank account. Emily entered Ethan's mansion as someone the wealthy people around him considered just a maid, yet she possessed what their money could never purchase: loyalty, courage, compassion, and truth. The people Ethan trusted, because of status, nearly stole his fortune and destroyed his future, while the woman they looked down upon helped save both his family and his heart. If you believe genuine love should heal rather than manipulate, that kindness deserves respect regardless of social class, and that good people should never be judged by how little they own, kindly subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell for more powerful stories like this. And tell us in the comments, would you have forgiven Ethan and his mother after they threw Emily out? Would you have trusted Grant after 20 years of friendship? And do you believe someone with nothing to gain can sometimes be more loyal than someone who seems to have everything.